Trapped in a sinking car by her ex, the Mafia boss risked his life to save her. "Do not look at me like that, Iris." I said those words while my fingers gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the leather. The water outside the window was already rising past the hood, a dark, suffocating wall of glass. "I told you I would never let anyone chain you down again," I whispered, my voice dangerously low, cutting through the sound of the freezing river forcing its way into the cabin. "But you are bleeding, tae-jun," she gasped, her hands shaking against my wet suit jacket. "You broke your own rules for a civilian." I leaned in closer, my dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the entire world vanish. "Then let the rules burn," I said. "I am not letting you drown." If this story already has its hand around your chest, you're exactly who the Noir Library was built for. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone who needs it tonight. You will not want to miss what comes next. One question for the comments before we go back in. Have you ever loved someone so completely that protecting them felt more natural than protecting yourself? Iris pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer needle climb past 60. The winding road ahead disappeared into sheets of water that hammered her windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. She had been driving for 40 minutes, leaving the rural property where she had spent 6 hours photographing an old estate for some local magazine that paid barely enough to cover her rent. 29 years old and still chasing freelance crumbs. Her parents would have had opinions about that if they were still alive to voice them. 3 years gone and she still reached for her phone sometimes to call them before remembering. Headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, high beams cutting through the storm. They had been there for miles now. 10 at least, maybe more. Rural Oregon at 11 p.m. did not exactly have traffic, and this car maintained the same distance no matter how fast or slow she drove. She tested it, slowed to 45. The lights fell back. She sped up to 65. They matched her pace exactly. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The leather was slick with the nervous sweat coating her palms despite the cold seeping through the doors. She told herself it was a coincidence, just another driver heading toward Portland on the same empty highway. But her gut screamed otherwise. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light cut through her side window. A heavy SUV rammed into her rear bumper. The impact slammed her head back against the seat. Her tires screeched against the wet asphalt. Before she could regain control, the vehicle swerved in front of her, cutting her off completely and forcing her to slam on the brakes. Her car spun, sliding sideways across the rain-slicked road until it ground to a violent halt against the dirt shoulder. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she threw the car into reverse, desperately trying to find an escape route. But before she could move, her driver's side door was ripped open from the outside. A cold blast of wind and rain hit her face, followed by a hand that gripped her jacket and dragged her forcefully across the console. She screamed, kicking wildly, until the shadows of the storm shifted, revealing a face she never wanted to see again. "Did you really think you could run away from me, Iris?" A familiar, grating voice sneered. "Marcus," she choked out, the terror paralyzing her limbs. "Let me go. Get away from me." "You ruined my life," he muttered, his eyes wide and unhinged as he shoved her backward into the driver's seat. He climbed into the car right over her, taking the wheel and locking the doors in one swift motion. "You took everything from me when you walked away. Now, we are going to finish this." He threw the car into drive and slammed his foot on the gas. The tires spun wildly before catching traction, launching them down the dark highway. She lunged for the gear shift, but Marcus slammed his elbow into her chest, knocking the air from her lungs. She coughed, gasping for breath as he veered onto the narrow two-lane bridge over the Willamette River. "What are you doing, Marcus?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Stop the car. If I cannot have you, nobody will," he barked, a manic laugh escaping his lips. Before she could process his words, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. With terrifying speed, he grabbed her right wrist, forcing it against the metal frame of the steering wheel. The cold steel clicked tightly around her flesh, locking her securely to the center of the wheel. "Marcus, no please," she begged, tugging violently at the chain, but the metal did not budge. "Goodbye, Iris," he whispered. He yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, aiming the nose of the car straight toward the weak guardrail of the bridge. In the exact same breath, Marcus threw his weight against the passenger door, popped it open, and dove out into the darkness of the road. The car crashed through the metal railing. The shriek of tearing iron echoed through the night. Then there was nothing underneath the tires, just air and a terrifying sense of falling. The impact with the river felt like hitting solid concrete. The windshield shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, and her head snapped violently forward. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Within seconds, the freezing river water rushed through the seams around the doors, shocking her system and stealing her breath. She fumbled desperately with her free hand, trying to release the seatbelt. She got it free, but when she tried to pull away, the steel cuffs jerked her right arm back against the steering wheel. The car tilted forward, the heavy nose sinking faster than the back. Water was at her waist, then her chest. Panic clawed up her throat. "Help!" She screamed into the empty cabin, but the only sound was the rushing water filling the space. The water reached her neck. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps as she tilted her head back against the headrest, trying to keep her mouth above the rising waterline. She used her left hand to scramble across the door, searching for the window button. She pressed it repeatedly. Nothing. The electronics were completely dead. The water covered her mouth. She took one last deep gulp of air before the river closed over her nose. Then she was completely under. Her lungs burned. She pounded on the steering wheel with her free fist, accomplishing nothing except sending jolts of agony up her arm. The darkness outside the car was absolute. Her vision started to narrow, black spots eating away at the edges of my sight. Her chest felt like it would cave in. She was going to die here, locked to a steering wheel, because her psychotic ex-boyfriend wanted her dead. Suddenly, the driver's side window exploded inward. Glass shredded the water around her like a silver cloud. My hand reached through the debris, grabbing her shoulder. She thrashed underwater, trying to point to her wrist, trying to show me the chain. I leaned further into the flooded car. My eyes opened underwater, scanning the cabin until they landed on the steel handcuffs, locking her to the wheel. I did not hesitate. I did not swim away to find a tool. I clamped my hands onto the thick steel structure of the steering wheel itself. She watched through the blurry water as the veins in my arms bulged against my wet clothes. With a display of immense raw physical strength, I twisted and wrenched the entire metal frame. The steel of the wheel bent and warped under my grip, snapping the structural's core until the handcuffs slid free from the broken column. I grabbed her waist, pulling her out through the shattered window. We moved upward through the black water, rising fast because her lungs were completely empty. We broke the surface into the pouring rain. She gasped, coughing violently, choking on the river water she had inhaled. "I have got you," I growled near her ear. "Do not fight me. Just breathe." She could not have fought if she wanted to. Her body had given up entirely. I swam us toward the shore, one powerful arm hooked securely under her chest, while my legs did all the work against the heavy current. When we reached the muddy bank, I lifted her out of the water like she weighed nothing, laying her gently on her back. My face was a dark silhouette against the storm clouds. I stood tall over her, water streaming from my tailored clothes, blood running down my temple from a cut near my hairline. "Ambulance is coming," I said, my voice flat, yet carrying an absolute authority. I reached down, my heavy hands pressing against her ribs to check for injuries. She cried out in pain. I muttered a quiet apology, then immediately shrugged out of my coat, draping it over her shivering body. The coat was heavy, expensive wool, and still warm from my skin. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice sounding like gravel. "It does not matter," I said, stepping back into the shadows of the trees. "You are safe now." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer by the second. "Wait." She tried to sit up, reaching out for me, but her body failed her. "I do not even know your name." But I was already gone, swallowed by the darkness of the woods. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Paramedics wrapped her in heated blankets and checked her vitals, while police officers descended on the scene with bright lights and endless questions. She answered what she could through chattering teeth, explaining the crash, the handcuffs, and Marcus. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she caught a glimpse of her car being pulled from the river. The steering column was completely mangled, twisted like a piece of cheap plastic. Looking at it, she could not understand how any human being could have bent that metal with bare hands. Iris woke up in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee. A nurse with kind eyes smiled when she saw her blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. "Welcome back, sweetheart," the nurse said gently. "You gave us quite a scare." "How long have I been here?" she asked, her throat feeling like sandpaper. 3 hours since you came in," the nurse said, adjusting the IV line in her arm. "You have got some bruised ribs, mild hypothermia, and plenty of small cuts. But you are incredibly lucky. The man who brought you to the paramedics did not stay, though. He refused treatment and left before anyone could get his name." "Did he leave anything?" she asked, pushing herself up despite the protest of her muscles. The nurse pointed to the chair beside the bed. "Left his coat. It is an expensive thing. Must have cost several $1,000s." Iris looked at the chair. The heavy wool coat was draped over the cushion, still damp from the river. She reached out, pulling the collar closer until she saw the elegant embroidery visible on the inside pocket. Initials were stitched there in gold thread, HTJ. The police came an hour later. 2 detectives entered the room, their faces expressionless. They asked standard questions about Marcus, about where he might hide, and about their past relationship. But their tone felt distant, almost dismissive. "Miss Collins," the older detective said, leaning against the wall, "we checked the registration on your vehicle. We are doing what we can, but cases like this take time. Marcus has a clean record on paper. He cuffed me to a steering wheel and drove me off a bridge." She snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "That is not a domestic dispute. That is attempted murder. We understand your frustration," the detective replied smoothly. "We will file the report." When they left, a cold knot of dread settled in her stomach. They were not going to look for him. The casual way they handled the investigation felt wrong. The hospital released her 2 days later. Her best friend picked her up and drove her back to her small apartment. The space felt different now, smaller, less safe. She locked every deadbolt on the door and shoved a heavy wooden chair under the handle for good measure. That night, she sat on her living room floor, staring at the gold initials on the coat, HTJ. She opened her laptop and typed the letters into an encrypted database she used for investigative research. It took 3 hours of digging through corporate registries, hidden assets, and old news archives before the name finally appeared. Han Tae-jun, 34 years old, the head of the Han Syndicate, an untouchable organization that controlled the shipping docks and logistics networks across the entire coast. He had never been arrested, never even been officially questioned. To the public, he was a reclusive billionaire philanthropist. To the underworld, I was a ghost who ruled with absolute authority. She stared at the digital image on her screen. My sharp, angular features, dark hair, and intense eyes seemed to look right through the lens. This was the man who had ripped a steering wheel apart to save her life. Suddenly, a loud, firm knock echoed through her silent apartment. She jumped, dropping her laptop onto the carpet. Her breath hitched. She grabbed her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency digits as she crept toward the front door. She looked through the tiny peephole. Her heart stopped. I stood in the dimly lit hallway. I was wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, my posture completely relaxed, hands resting loosely at my sides. I waited with the patience of a man who knew she was watching. Every survival instinct told her to stay quiet, to pretend she was not home. But I had pulled her from a sinking tomb. I already knew where she lived. She undid the chain lock, cracking the door open just a few inches. Iris Collins, my voice rubbed against the silence, deep and certain. "You know my name," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I do," I replied, my eyes tracking across her face, evaluating her expression. "I came to see if you were recovering from the river." "How did you find my address?" she asked, gripping the edge of the door. I glanced past her shoulder toward the couch where my coat was resting. "You have something of mine. It felt appropriate to retrieve it in person. That does not explain how you bypassed my building's security," she pointed out. "No, it does not," I said, tilting my head slightly. "May I come in? This hallway is not the proper place for the conversation we need to have." She looked at me for a long moment. If I wanted to hurt her, a locked door would not stop a man who could bend steel. She unlatched the chain and stepped back, opening the door completely. "Thank you," she said quietly, stepping into her apartment. I moved with an effortless, quiet precision, my large frame making her living room look incredibly small. I did not look at the furniture or the cheap decor. My gaze went straight to her laptop on the floor, where my own digital profile was still active on the screen. "You have been doing some research," I remarked, turning to face her. She closed the laptop, keeping her eyes on me. I wanted to know who broke a steering column with his bare hands. Han tae-jun is a name I know from news reports, but the streets call you something else. "They call me many things," I replied, my expression remaining perfectly blank. "None of them matter right now. What matters is your ex-boyfriend, Marcus," she breathed. "What does he have to do with you?" "Marcus owes my organization $3 million, I said, listing the figure as if I were discussing the weather. "He ran a logistics front for us and skimmed from the top. When he realized my men were closing in, he decided to vanish. Putting you in that river was his way of trying to create a distraction, a tragedy to keep the local police occupied while he fled the state." The room seemed to spin for her. Marcus did not just want to kill her out of jealousy. She was an asset to be discarded for his escape. "The police," she stammered. "I told them everything. They said they would investigate." I let out a short, humorless sound that might have been a laugh. "The detectives who visited your hospital room receive a regular monthly retention fee from my competitors," I said calmly. Marcus ran to them for protection. "If you think the local precinct is going to save you, you are living in a fantasy, Iris. You are lying," she said, backing away until her calves hit the edge of the couch. "I do not waste my breath on lies," I replied, stepping closer. "Marcus failed to kill you. The cartel knows you can identify him, which makes you a loose end for them as well. They are watching this building right now." She looked toward her covered window. terror freezing the blood in her veins. "So what am I supposed to do?" she asked, looking up at me. "Run?" "No," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute authority. "You are going to accept my protection. I have a secure estate outside the city. You will stay there until I locate Marcus and settle his debt." "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why save me from the river? Why protect me now?" "Because Marcus used my territory and my name to commit an atrocity," I said, my jaw tightening slightly. "And because I do not allow things under my sky to be broken by cowards." "Pack a bag, Iris. We leave in 2 minutes." She hated that my words made perfect sense. She hated that the only person offering her a chance to survive was the most dangerous man in the city. She walked to her bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and threw in whatever clothes she could reach. Her hands shook so badly she could barely zip the bag shut. When she returned to the living room, I was standing by the door, holding my coat. I handed it to her. "Wear it," I ordered gently. "It is still cold outside." We left the building through a service elevator she did not even know existed. A heavy black SUV was waiting in the alley, the engine idling silently. A large man in a dark suit opened the rear door for us, nodding respectfully to me. "Is the perimeter clear?" I asked as we climbed into the leather interior. "Yes, boss," the driver replied, shifting the vehicle into gear. 2 scouts from the cartel were at the front entrance. They did not see us leave. We drove away from the neon lights of the city, heading west into the dark, forested hills that lined the highway. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the tires against the wet asphalt. She watched the city skyline fade into the distance through the tinted glass, wondering if she would ever see her old life again. I sat beside her, my legs crossed, staring out at the passing trees. I did not speak, but my presence was a solid, unyielding weight that somehow kept her panic from taking over. The drive took nearly an hour before the vehicle slowed down, turning onto a private road hidden behind a massive set of reinforced steel gates disguised as wrought iron. The gates swung open automatically, closing tightly behind us the moment the SUV passed through. The driveway curved through precisely maintained landscaping until a massive modern fortress emerged from the darkness. It was a stunning architectural piece of glass, dark wood, and concrete, built directly into the side of the hill. Security cameras were visible at every corner, their small red lights blinking in the rain. "Welcome to my home," I said as the car came to a stop. "You will be safe here." She followed me through the heavy front doors into an expansive foyer with polished stone floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the black expanse of the forest. The interior was minimalist, beautiful, and completely devoid of any personal touches. A broad-shouldered man with graying hair stepped forward, bowing slightly to me. "Boss, everything is prepared," the man said, his eyes shifting briefly to Iris before returning to me. "The security detail has been doubled for the night." "Thank you, Vincent," I said. "Take her bag to the Eastern guest suite. Iris, follow me." I led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom that featured a king-sized bed, a private sitting area, and an attached bathroom. The room was immaculate, but when she looked at the heavy mahogany door, she noticed something immediately. "There is no lock on this door," she said, turning to face me. "You do not need a lock," I replied, leaning against the door frame. "My men value their lives far too much to enter this hallway without my explicit permission. You are under my personal protection." "And what about you?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Do you enter without permission?" "My quarters are at the opposite end of this structure," I said, my expression completely unreadable. "You will not see me unless you choose to. Dinner is served at 7 each evening. You may join me, or Vincent can bring your meals up here. The choice is yours." I straightened up, turning to leave the room. "Tae-jun," she called out before I could step away. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the river. And for this." I gave a single slow nod of my head. "Rest now, Iris," I said softly, closing the door behind me. She sank onto the edge of the mattress, the silence of the massive house pressing against her ears. Less than 72 hours ago, she was drowning in the dark. Now, she was a guest in the castle of a Mafia king. She closed her eyes, listening to the rain hammer against the glass, wondering what version of herself would survive this cage. The sun did not rise over the estate so much as the fog simply turned from black to an ash gray. Iris stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom, watching the pine trees swallow the morning light. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the cold water of the Willamette River seemed to fill her chest, and she could still feel the phantom pressure of a steel cuff pressing against her wrist. A quiet knock disturbed the silence. Iris turned quickly, her shoulders tense as the heavy mahogany door swung inward. It was Vincent, the graying chief of security. He held a silver tray with a pot of coffee, a single cup, and a small glass of orange juice. "Good morning, Miss Collins," Vincent said, his voice flat but entirely polite. "The boss requested I bring this to you. He is currently down in the courtyard." "Thank you, Vincent," Iris said, stepping forward to take the tray. "Is he always up this early?" Vincent allowed a faint, knowing smile to touch his lips. "The boss does not sleep much, Miss Collins. When you run an empire, the dark is when your enemies do their best work. If you require anything else, use the intercom by the bed." He bowed his head slightly and retreated, closing the door behind him. Iris set the tray down but ignored the coffee. Her camera gear was gone, sitting at the bottom of a river along with her old car, but her eyes still looked at the world through a lens of observation. She needed to know what kind of place she was trapped in. She slipped out of her room and moved silently down the wide carpeted corridor, following the distant sound of rhythmic, heavy thuds coming from the lower level. She followed the sound down a secondary staircase that led to a private gym facing the rear courtyard. Through the glass wall she stopped. I was there, wrapped in nothing but dark athletic trousers. My skin was slick with sweat, the morning mist clinging to my shoulders as I threw a brutal combination of punches into a heavy leather bag. The raw, immense strength that had bent her car's steering column was on full display. With every strike, the heavy bag groaned under the impact, swinging wildly on its steel chains. Iris watched from the shadows of the doorway, her breath catching as she noticed the jagged silver scars tracing across my back and shoulders. One particular mark, a deep circular burn near my shoulder blade, looked like a remnant of a past she could only begin to imagine. "If you are going to take a photo, you will need a camera, Iris." I did not stop punching. My voice simply cut through the damp air, steady and completely unbothered by her presence. Iris stepped out from the doorway, her chin tilting up defensively. "I do not have a camera anymore. You left it in the river." I delivered one final, devastating hook that sent the bag shuddering, then caught it with both hands, stabilizing the leather. I grabbed a white towel from a bench, wiping the sweat from my forehead as I turned to look at her. My dark eyes scanned her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "You did not sleep," I said, walking toward the glass doors and stepping into the hallway with her. "No," she replied, matching my pace as I walked toward the main kitchen. "It is hard to sleep when you are living in a fortress owned by a man the city thinks is a myth." "The myth keeps you breathing," I said smoothly. I poured myself a glass of ice water, leaning back against the marble counter. Iris stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. The dynamic between us was a strange rope, pulling tight tension, but anchored by the fact that I was the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave. "Tae-jun," she said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. "What happens now? I cannot just sit in this room forever. I am a journalist. I am used to working, to moving." "You stay here until Marcus is found," I replied, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "My men are turning the city upside down. The cartel is hiding him because they think he can leverage something against me. Until that leverage is eliminated, you are a target." "Then let me help," she said, stepping closer. I paused, setting my glass down on the counter. The silence in the kitchen grew heavy. "Help," I repeated, a cold amusement touching my lips. "You are a civilian, Iris. You photograph old buildings and write society columns. This is a war. I am a photojournalist," she corrected, her eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp intelligence. "I spent 3 years tracking corporate corruption before I took that freelance gig. I know how to follow money. I know how to read logistics manifests. You said Marcus skimmed $3 million from your logistics fronts. He did not do that alone. He needed a shell company, and he needed a digital clean room to hide the transaction trail." I stared at her, evaluating the fierce determination in her posture. She was not a victim begging for safety. She was a woman trying to claw her way back to an even playing field. "You think you can find his accounts?" I asked. "I know I can," she said confidently. "But I need a machine with a clean network tap, and I need access to your organization's internal ledger for the Portland docks." I studied her for a long moment. The sheer audacity of a civilian demanding access to a Mafia ledger would have gotten anyone else removed from my property. But Iris had an edge to her that intrigued me. "Vincent," I called out. The gray-haired securities chief appeared from the hallway instantly, as if he had been waiting for the command. "Yes, boss." "Take Miss Collins to the secondary study," I ordered, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "Set her up with an encrypted terminal on our private terminal loop. Give her the redacted files on the Portland shipping manifest for the last 6 months." Vincent's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but he quickly masked it. "Right away, boss." "If you compromise my network, Iris," I said, my voice dropping into a dangerous low register, "the river will seem like a pleasant memory." "I will find Marcus," she replied, turning on her heel before I could say another word. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Iris was buried in data. The secondary study was a small wood-paneled room on the 3rd floor, filled with monitors and paper files that Vincent had brought up. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind tuning out the luxury of the estate and focusing entirely on the numbers swimming across the dark screens. She tracked the $3 million. It had not been moved in one lump sum. It had been pulled out in increments of $50,000, disguised as maintenance fees for shipping containers moving through Dock 4. Suddenly, the door opened quietly. A young woman, no older than 25, walked into the room carrying a plate of small sandwiches. She had the same dark hair and striking, elegant features as Tae-jun, but her eyes held a warmth that was entirely missing from the Mafia boss. "You must be Iris," the woman said, setting the plate down next to the terminal. "I am Lucia, Tae-jun's sister." Iris paused, blinking away the strain of the monitor. "Thank you. I did not know Tae-jun had family living here. He keeps me close," Lucia said, taking a seat on the leather sofa across from the desk. "Or rather, he keeps me locked away where no one can use me against him. He does that with people he cares about protecting." "I am not someone he cares about," Iris said, looking back at the manifest files. "I am just a loose end he is tying up." Lucia let out a soft, melodic laugh that echoed off the dark wood walls. "My brother does not risk his life for loose ends, Iris." Vincent told me what happened at the river. Tae-jun dove into that water without a second thought. Do you know when the last time was that he put himself in direct danger like that? Iris turned around in her chair, her journalistic curiosity instantly piqued. When? 5 years ago, Lucia said, her voice dropping into a sober, quiet tone. Our older brother Jin-woo was betrayed by a rival family. They took his wife, a woman named Natasha. Tae-jun went in alone to get her out. He breached a warehouse guarded by 20 men with nothing but his bare hands and a tactical knife. Did he save her? Iris asked, the air in the room turning cold. No, Lucia whispered, looking down at her hands. He was 2 minutes too late. Natasha died in his arms. That was the night our older brother walked away from the business, and Tae-jun took the throne. He swore he would never let a woman under his sky be destroyed by a coward again. When he saw you cuffed to that wheel, he did not just see a civilian. He saw a debt he failed to pay 5 years ago. Before Iris could process the weight of Lucia's words, a sudden, deafening klaxon horn split the silence of the estate. The red security lights in the corners of the ceiling began to flash violently. The terminal screen in front of Iris went black, replaced by a flashing red warning. Perimeter breach, Gate 2. Lucia stood up instantly, her face turning pale. It is a raid. Vincent burst into the room a second later, a heavy submachine gun gripped in his weathered hands. Miss Collins, Lucia, move now. The server rooms have been targeted. We have an internal leak. Someone sold the gate codes. Where is Tae-jun? Iris screamed over the sound of the alarms. He is at the front courtyard, holding the line, Vincent barked, pulling a compact pistol from his waistband and shoving it into Iris's hands. Do you know how to use this? Iris stared at the cold metal of the weapon. Her hands shook, but she remembered the terror of being locked to the steering wheel, the complete helplessness of that moment. She gripped the handle, her finger resting along the frame exactly as her father had taught her years ago. Yes, she said, her voice hardening. Keep Lucia behind you and move to the reinforced bunker downstairs, Vincent ordered, turning toward the balcony to engage the intruders. The sounds of gunfire erupted from the lower levels. The sharp, rhythmic cracks of assault rifles rattled the glass windows of the estate. Iris grabbed Lucia's hand, pulling her out into the corridor. The air was already thick with the bitter scent of gunpowder and smoke. They moved down the eastern hallway, but before they could reach the secondary staircase, 2 men dressed in black tactical gear and cartel colors stepped out from the shadows at the end of the hall. There she is, one of the men yelled, raising his rifle. Take the girl, kill the sister. Iris did not think. The survival instinct that had kept her alive in the freezing river took over completely. She raised the pistol with both hands, planting her feet, and fired 3 times down the narrow hallway. The heavy cracks of the pistol echoed off the concrete. The first intruder slumped against the wall, dropping his weapon. The second man dove for cover, firing a wild spray of bullets that shredded the drywall above Iris's head. Get down, Iris yelled, shoving Lucia into a recessed doorway. Before the second gunman could step out to finish them, a massive shadow descended from the stairwell above. It was me. My suit jacket was gone, my white shirt splattered with dark crimson. I did not even look at the weapon in the man's hand. With an explosion of terrifying speed and immense physical power, I closed the distance, grabbing the gunman's throat with one hand and slamming him violently into the concrete pillar. The force of the impact cracked the structure, and the man went limp instantly, dropping to the floor like a rag doll. I turned around, my chest heaving, my dark eyes wild with a feral protective fury until they landed on Iris. She was still holding the pistol, her posture steady, despite the chaos around her. Are you hurt? I growled, my hands grabbing her shoulders, checking her for wounds with a desperate speed. I am fine, Iris gasped, her eyes wide as she looked at the blood on my shirt. tae-jun, you are bleeding. It is not my blood, I said, my voice rough and low. I looked down the hallway, where the gunfire was finally beginning to quiet down as my security details wiped out the remaining attackers. Vincent ran up the stairs, his face covered in soot. "Boss, the perimeter is secure," Vincent reported, catching his breath. "We lost 3 guards, but the cartel strike team was completely eliminated. We found the internal link. It was one of the logistics managers from Dock 4. He gave them the estate codes an hour ago. Where is Marcus?" I demanded, my grip tightening on Iris's shoulder until she winced slightly. Vincent looked down, his jaw tight. "The manager talked before he died. Boss, Marcus is not running. The cartel has him holed up at an abandoned processing plant near the northern docks. They were using this raid to distract you while they moved his financial records out of the state." "They wanted a distraction," I whispered, a cold, lethal smile spreading across my face. "Then let us give them a show." I turned back to Iris, looking at the pistol still gripped tightly in her hand. "You found the accounts, didn't you?" "Yes," she said, her voice matching my intensity. "Marcus moved the $3 million to a transit corporation called Vanguard Marine. If you take out that hub, the cartel loses their entire Western distribution network." "Vincent, prepare the cars," I ordered, my eyes never leaving Iris's. "We are going to the northern docks. And Iris, you are coming with me. It is time to finish the ghost that put you in that river." The heavy steel doors of the armored SUV rattled as we sped down the deserted industrial highway toward the northern docks. Rain hammered the roof like a frantic drumbeat, matching the rhythm of the blood pumping through my veins. Beside me, Iris was staring down at her lap, her fingers tracing the edge of the laptop she had refused to leave behind. She had wrapped my oversized wool coat tightly around her shoulders, her small frame swallowed by the dark fabric. "Are you afraid?" I asked, my voice cutting through the hum of the engine. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes held no tears, only a cold, focused anger that I recognized all too well. "I was afraid when the water reached my chin," she said, her voice entirely steady. "I was afraid when I realized the metal wouldn't move. Right now, I just want him to look me in the eye when he realizes he failed." I looked at her for a long moment, then shifted my gaze back to the dark road ahead. "You have the heart of a survivor, Iris. In my world, that is the only currency that matters." Vincent's voice crackled through the front radio receiver. "Boss, we are 2 minutes out from the Vanguard processing plant. Scouts report at least 15 armed cartel enforcers guarding the perimeter. They know we are coming, but they do not know we have their financial keys. Block the exits," I ordered into the radio, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute authority. "No one leaves that building alive except Marcus. I want him breathing when I find him." "Copy that, boss." The SUV veered sharply to the left, crashing through a rusty chain-link gate and skidding to a halt inside the flooded courtyard of the abandoned processing plant. Before the vehicle had even completely stopped, the doors flew open. The night exploded into noise. Cartel gunmen opened fire from the upper walkways, muzzle flashes illuminating the falling rain like strobe lights. Bullets tore into the reinforced armor of the SUV, leaving deep, silver gouges in the metal. "Stay down," I commanded Iris, pulling a heavy tactical rifle from the rack beneath my seat. "Vincent, cover the eastern flank. Move in." I stepped out into the storm, the rain instantly soaking through my white linen shirt. The raw, immense physical strength that defined my reputation took over. I didn't hide behind the vehicles. I moved with an unnatural, terrifying speed across the open tarmac, firing precise bursts that dropped 2 snipers from the metal scaffolding before they could even re-aim their weapons. A third gunman stepped out from a side door, raising a shotgun directly at my chest. I didn't waste a bullet. I lunged forward, closing the distance in a single stride, and grabbed the hot barrel of his gun with my bare hand. With a violent twist of my arm, I ripped the weapon from his grip, fracturing his wrist in the process. Before he could scream, I drove my fist into his chest, the sheer force of the impact sending him flying backward through the wooden door frame. Behind me, Iris didn't stay in the car. Ignoring my command, she slipped out of the rear door, using the shadow of the SUV to shield herself. She carried her laptop in one hand and the small compact pistol I had given her in the other. Her eyes scanned the layout of the facility, tracking the wires that ran from the external satellite array down into the basement level. "Tae-jun," she screamed over the roar of the gunfire. "The central server room isn't in the main office. It is down in the old cold storage vault. That is where Marcus is hiding the transfer nodes." I cleared the remaining path with a final sweep of my rifle, then turned back to look at her. Her face was pale, splattered with mud and rain, but she was moving forward with a fierce determination that made my chest tighten. "Follow me," I growled, grabbing her waist and shielding her body with my own as we breached the heavy metal doors of the main facility. The interior of the processing plant was a hollow labyrinth of rusted iron hooks, concrete vats, and rotting timber. The air smelled of old copper and stagnant water. Our footsteps echoed off the high ceilings as we descended a concrete ramp that led deep into the subterranean levels. The silence down here was absolute, a stark contrast to the war raging in the courtyard above. At the bottom of the ramp stood a single, heavily reinforced vault door, its digital keypad glowing a bright, aggressive green. The lock had been bypassed from the inside. Iris stepped forward, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. "If I connect to the external terminal box here, I can lock Marcus out of the primary transfer protocol. He will be trapped in the system." "Do it," I said, raising my rifle to cover the hallway behind us. "You have 60 seconds." She plugged a data cable into the vault's maintenance port. Her fingers flew across the keys, line after line of financial data reflecting in her wide eyes. She was a civilian, an outsider to my violent world, but watching her operate in this moment, I realized she possessed an intelligence that was just as lethal as any weapon in my armory. "Got it," she whispered, hitting the enter key with a definitive snap. "The Vanguard accounts are frozen. The $3 million is back in your system, and the cartel's distribution network is completely blacked out. He has nowhere left to run." An instant later, the heavy vault door clicked, slowly swinging inward on its massive hinges. The room inside was small, illuminated only by the blue glow of server racks and a single desk lamp. Sitting at the desk, covered in sweat and panting like a cornered animal, was Marcus. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at the screen showing his failed transactions. When he looked up and saw Iris standing beside me, his face drained of all color. "Iris," he stammered, his voice shaking as he reached into his waistband for a hidden weapon. You were supposed to be dead." The car went under. I watched it go under. He didn't get the chance to pull the gun. I closed the distance before he could even register my movement. My hand clamped around his throat like a steel vise, lifting his entire body off the ground and slamming him hard against the server rack behind him. The metal groaned, wires snapping and sparking around his head. "You used my docs," I whispered, my voice dangerously low, vibrating with a lethal energy that made Marcus tremble against my grip. "You used my name to hide your cowardice. And you tried to drown a woman under my protection." "Tae-jun, please," Marcus choked out, his fingers desperately tearing at my wrist, but my grip didn't yield an inch. "I can give you the cartel's assets. I can give you everything. Just let me live." I looked back at Iris. She was standing by the desk, Her arms crossed over her chest, looking down at the man who had tried to murder her. Her eyes were completely cold, stripped of any residual fear. "What do you want to do with him, Iris?" I asked, giving her the power that Marcus had tried to steal from her on that bridge. Iris walked closer, stopping just inches from where Marcus hung suspended against the wall. She looked at his panicked face, the pathetic begging of a man who was only brave when his victim was chained down. "You are going to spend the rest of your short life realizing that the water didn't swallow me, Marcus," she said, her voice dropping into a quiet, icy certainty. "It just brought me to someone who actually knows how to handle a monster." She looked at me and gave a single, slow nod. I didn't waste another second. With a single, powerful surge of my arm, I threw Marcus down onto the concrete floor, where Vincent and two other guards instantly pinned him, wrapping heavy steel zip ties around his wrists. "Take him to the compound," I ordered Vincent. "He will answer for every dollar he took, and then he will disappear." "Right away, boss," Vincent replied, dragging the screaming man out of the vault. The silence returned to the room, heavy and thick. Iris stood in the center of the space, her shoulders finally dropping as the adrenaline began to fade from her system. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. I stepped closer to her, reaching out to gently touch her chin, lifting her face so her eyes met mine. "It is over, Iris," I said softly, my voice losing its rough, dictatorial edge. "He will never touch you again. You are free." She looked up at me, her dark eyes reflecting the blue light of the dying servers. "I don't think I will ever be completely free of that water, tae-jun. But standing here with you, I don't feel like I am drowning anymore." 1 year later. The storm had passed, replaced by a brilliant, clear summer afternoon that made the surface of the Willamette River look like a sheet of hammered silver. The old wooden bridge had been repaired, the broken guardrails replaced with heavy reinforced steel that gleamed in the sunlight. Iris stood at the edge of the overlook, her camera finally back in her hands. It was a new model, an expensive piece of equipment I had imported for her from Japan, and she was using it to capture the light bouncing off the water below. "You are staring," she said without turning around, a small smile playing on her lips as she adjusted the lens focus. I stepped up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her back against my chest. I had traded my dark suits for a lighter linen shirt, the tension of the underworld slowly fading as my organization finalized its transition into completely legitimate, legal shipping operations. "I am allowed to look at what belongs to me," I whispered against her ear, my hands resting over hers on the camera body. "I don't belong to anyone, Han tae-jun," she retorted, though she leaned back into my embrace, her head resting against my shoulder. I smiled, my fingers dipping into my pocket to pull out a small velvet box. I opened it, revealing a heavy platinum ring set with a brilliant, flawless diamond that had belonged to my grandmother. "You don't belong to me," I agreed, sliding the ring onto her finger before she could protest. "But you are going to walk beside me. No more chains, no more rivers, just you and me, ruling this city from the light." Iris stared at the ring, a single, happy tear escaping her eye as she turned around in my arms, throwing her hands around my neck. "Yes," she whispered against my lips. 1,000 times, yes. 4 years later, the camera shutter clicked 3 times in rapid succession. In the sun-drenched gardens of the mountain estate, a 3-year-old girl with dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes was chasing a golden retriever puppy across the pristine lawn. Her laughter filled the quiet air, a sweet, beautiful sound that seemed to banish the ghosts of the past entirely. "Aurora, look over here," Iris called out, kneeling on the grass with her camera raised to her eye. "Give Daddy a smile." The little girl stopped, turning to look toward where I sat on the stone patio, a cup of morning coffee in my hand. She let out a squeal of joy, running toward me with her arms outstretched. I caught her easily, lifting her high into the air with the same immense strength that had once bent steel, before bringing her down to sit safely on my knee. "You are ruining the framing, tae-jun," Iris laughed, walking toward us with the camera still pressed to her face. "Then, come join the picture," I said, reaching out my free hand to catch her waist, pulling her down into my side. She smiled, setting the camera on the stone table and activating the automatic timer. She curled into my side, her hand resting over mine, the platinum ring catching the afternoon sun. The shutter clicked one final time, capturing the image of a family built from the ruins of a betrayal. The central message was clear to anyone who would ever see it. A coward had tried to chain Iris to a sinking car to destroy her, but those chains had only dragged her deep enough to find the king of the city. And together, we had built an empire that nothing could ever wash away.